One of the biggest questions we get asked time and time again is how do I manage my financial ecosystem as a self-employed creative, right? I'm a photographer, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a social media manager, an influencer, a creator. And what do I do when it comes to tax season? How do I actually prep for my taxes? What write-off should I be looking to take? How do I minimize my tax liability, aka save money on taxes? What type of entity should I actually be setting up? Is it an LLC? Is it an S Corp? Is it a C Corp? Is it a sole proprietorship? Like, what are all the answers to these very complex and very gray questions that we often ask as self-employed individuals running our own creative businesses? And to be honest, this is a deep world, a very big world of answers, and a lot of those answers are not always helpful for you. And so today, we're having a conversation with the CEO, Hooman Radfar of Collective, which is an awesome solution. I keep wanting to call it a piece of software. It is a software company, but it's also a service where they take all of the grayness of a financial ecosystem and they help boil it down and really help self-employed individuals manage their money, figure out what entity type they are going to elect to be, and then learn how to file their taxes in a way where you're actually saving money. Now, I asked Hooman to come on the podcast because about 5 years ago, I stumbled upon collective.com, and I was super impressed with what they are doing and how they're simplifying a very complex world with very complex problems when it comes to the world of taxes in your financial ecosystem, being self-employed. So Collective does bookkeeping. They do all your tax strategy. They also do all of your filing for you. And the ways they're doing it are ways that I've been very impressed with. So super excited to have Hooman on the show today. Hooman is breaking down different entity types and which one you should be opting for. He's breaking down when you should switch from one entity type to another entity type. He's also breaking down what it looks like to separate your personal finances from your business finances, get some liability protection with different entity types. And of course, we then get into all of the advantages of different aspects of tax strategy and how you can look at that in order to save yourself some money on your taxes this year, which who does not want that? Christy and I are huge fans of that. And so this is a great conversation. So huge shout out to Hooman for coming on the podcast today and breaking some of these very complex questions down in a simple format. It was a ton of fun. Now, again, not being paid to say this. This is a total ask on our end. We asked if Hooman would come on the show and talk about this. Collective is the company that he is the CEO of and one of the co-partners, one of the founders on it. And we are big fans of it. In talking with their team a couple weeks ago, they actually gave us a coupon code for you guys because I have been looking for so long. One of the biggest questions we get asked all the time is who should I use as an accountant? And it's very hard to answer until I found Collective. Straight up found Collective and I was like, this is perfect for solopreneurs and their service. We vetted it. It's really solid. So they gave us a discount code for 50% off your first 3 months. You're going to save over $500 if you use the code Creative Rise while you are on collective.com and you are initiating and engaging with them, which is really cool. So any link to that is going to be in the description. Again, not being paid to say this. We're not being paid to have Hooman on the show today. Doing this because I truly do believe that what they are doing is a great solution for solo creatives. And it's the answer to a big question that we get asked all the time, which is who should I pick as my accountant? I think these guys are great. So whether you want to roll with Collective down the road and use them for your financial ecosystem partner, or whether you would not, and you just want to take some of the stuff that you're learning today from Hooman and I's conversation, highly suggest that you listen to this whole episode all the way through and take everything you can from it and implement it into your business. So we've got that. They've also got a free calculator to figure out what it looks like for your own tax savings on their website. That's also going to be in the description. You'll hear him talk about that in today's episode. But really excited for this episode, guys. Thank you, Hooman, for being on the show today and just sharing all the wisdom you've got on this very complex topic. Hopefully you guys super enjoy this. I really enjoyed the conversation. Here's my conversation with Hooman Radfar, CEO of Collective, on how you can save more money on your taxes. Awesome. Well, Hooman, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being on the podcast today to talk all about tax strategy, savings. You are obviously the CEO of Collective, and Collective is something that I've personally looked at, vetted, and we've encouraged a lot of people in our community to take a stab at using because you guys have really prioritized this single owner or the single operator, solo creator, and really making sure you guys are building good tax strategy systems for them with bookkeeping and accounting and all of that. So I'm super excited to chat about that and how you can encourage everybody listening to the show today on how they can save more money on their taxes and most importantly, just ditch the headaches, minimize any headaches. So welcome to the show, man. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm pumped. Hopefully, I can be some help.
Yeah, well, anytime anybody has any insight on this stuff, it's incredibly helpful to a lot of creatives. As you probably know, creative people, this stuff doesn't come super naturally for them. That's exactly why Creative Rise exists, and have existed for 6 years to solve those problems. And this is a big leg of it: is tax strategy, finance strategy, and all that. So you're the CEO of Collective. I want to get into some rapid fire here in a second, but just to give everybody insight and fill in any of the gaps quickly here on Collective. But Collective's vision is to increase the number of sustainable and financially successful businesses of one, so solo operating businesses, by helping them focus on their passion and taking care of all of the financial stuff. So the bookkeeping, the accounting, and really reducing the headaches. And you guys save on average, you guys advertise, you save on average up to like $10,000 for most people that come through and use Collective. Why don't you break down Collective a little bit more? Give everybody an intro who, if they do not know what Collective is.
Yeah, so I think you did it. Thank you. You did a pretty good job of explaining the high level. But so, how do we do that? So, what we offer is an online back office. And so, it's a solution, right? And that solution to me is something that was unique to the market that we brought up. Before we started, people were typically going to accountants and then probably leveraging a couple DIY type tools and stringing it together to try to achieve some solution. And ultimately, I think if you want to boil down the emotion that creatives feel, solopreneurs feel, is you don't know what you don't know. You're great at what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing, but you don't necessarily understand it. You may understand a little bit of bookkeeping, a little bit of tax, payroll, so on and so forth, but the concert and how they work together, it's scary. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what got us excited about starting. My co-founder actually was a solopreneur. He was a freelancer. He was a creative. He's a designer. And
Cool.
so that's what inspired him to work together with me and my other co-founder to build Collective. So the solution is we wanted to just do it for you. Unlike when you go to like an accountant or you have bespoke solutions where you're almost have this adverse incentive not to chat with the people, we wanted to say, look,
Mm-hmm.
there's a flat price, so you don't have to worry about asking us questions. We handle everything, so it's not like you have to go to these specialist providers and string it together. So we basically have a comprehensive solution that'll take you from formation. So if you don't have an entity, we'll create an entity like an LLC, as selection, which is part of the core plan that we offer now. Um, so that's a tax selection that helps us save money. I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit, and then get all the things set up like operating agreement and so on and so forth. That's how you have a compliant, what's called entity, and then using that compliant entity, you have to actually go ahead and set up your financial systems of record to achieve the result, which is tax savings. So you need
Mm-hmm.
bookkeeping, right? We
Yeah,
need to understand your
absolutely.
expenses. We need to categorize those. We need to reconcile against your bank account. You need payroll, which was to me non-intuitive, but as selected companies, I think are all familiar. You need that
Yep.
payroll, and the distinction between your payroll, your W-2 income, and what's called the distribution is where the magic happens in an S selected company.
Mm-hmm.
And then using that, those systems of record, you can output and say, okay, well, what's my quarterly tax estimate and what's my annual tax filing? And what you do is you see the tax savings actually show up in your personal tax savings, believe it or not, because it's about how you pay yourself. Because you have two roles in your business. You're the owner of the business, but you're an employee of the business. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really about giving yourself some additional what's called the distribution, and that's less taxable. And so I could walk through it. But anyway, we provide that at a flat rate, um, all you can eat kind of support and a subscription. So we try to handle it for you, and we have try to create an integrated experience. And I think we were the first to market to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
now I think we have a really unique opportunity to really streamline that and make it turbocharged as we start to scale and we get larger and larger and larger. I mean, we have right now we're helping our community manage up our $1 billion finances, which is
It's
a pretty
amazing.
big milestone for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, what I love about what you just said is you are making probably the most confusing, never know how much it's going to cost thing about running a business, which is your bookkeeping, which is your tax strategy, which is your accounting, all the unknowns about it. Collective is trying to take all that out, flat rate price, which is amazing, and almost concierge style, right? You're like, everything's included. Here's everything you're going to get. And from how I'm aware about Collective, you guys are once you pay that price, it's like, yeah, we're here for you. Like if you need a call, like let's jump on a call. Let's plan something. Let's make sure you're in the know and we want to take care of you really well. I was just saying right before we hit record that I wish we could be using Collective. You guys are, I'm sure, going to be growing to the point where you can work with entity types like my wife and I, Christy, are at right now. I wish we could be working with you guys. I actually stumbled upon Collective when I first got to the US 5 years ago. I think that was probably around the time you guys launched,
We just
2020
started.
ish.
Oh yeah.
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 So
Fall
I
of 2020
really,
is when we launched.
really liked what you guys were offering. Yeah. So, well, this is great. Why don't we start then, Hooman? Why don't we start right at the beginning? You guys said the first thing that you guys help people focus on is actually getting an entity. So, why don't we start there? What are some of the mistakes you see solopreneurs make? And in this example, we'll talk creatives, photographers, filmmakers, social media managers, creators in the creative space. What are some of the mistakes you see creatives make when it comes to picking the right entity to legalize their business?
Well, I'd say the single largest mistake is not having an entity. I
Mm,
think oftentimes, and this is, I think, done with the best of intentions, and I don't think it's something that people uh, do willfully. But my parents were solopreneurs. My cousins, I have so many people who are friends, family, and so often when you get into it, you're like, well, I'm going to try this out for a year or 2 years and dip my toe in the water, and let's see even if I can get any business. It's
hmm
not crazy, right? And so I think what ends up happening is the inertia of life, so you start getting contracts, and maybe if you're a photographer or whatever, you start invoicing people. Well, how do I invoice? Start sending Google Sheets. And before you know it, you have some income. Okay. And tax season's about, okay, I'll go file it. And it turns out you actually don't legally need an entity to run your business. I think a lot of people think when they're starting a business, they need an entity. You do not. You can be what's called a sole prop. And I think it makes sense sometimes for people to sole prop if you are maybe just trying it out, or, maybe you're in between things. Personally, though, like I said, the biggest mistake is I would err on the side of creating an entity. And at a minimum, if I was a creative and I'd say if I had a boilerplate, I'd say start at maybe an LLC, for example. And the
hmm
reason being is you want to separate your personal liability from your business liability. And you never want to imagine this, especially as a creative. You don't think people would sue you or what have you. But I think you need to understand that, like, look, it never is bad till it's bad, right?
hmm
And what you want to
Yeah.
do is separate your personal finances from that. So God forbid, let's say you're making a video or you're doing something and you have a huge production and there's some value that you've created, but the person who's your client says, I don't want it. I disagree with it. I'm going to sue you. I don't want to pay you or whatever. Well, you don't want to be sued personally. Joey doesn't want to be sued. Joey
hmm
Co wants to be sued. And I think if you
hmm
look at the cost of filing an entity and you look at the cost of maintaining an entity relative to that potential liability, I think it's worth it. I think it's
mm
absolutely worth it. So that would be the first and foremost thing that I would advise. I think when you want to start stepping forward and you made that decision to have an entity, there's a number of steps that you have to discuss, whether it's LLC or MLLC, for example. There's more in there. But I would say, for example, I'm a member of Collective. My wife and I are leveraging it. Both of us have some 1099 income, and we're just a single member LLC. We could have opted to have an LLC which made her, a shareholder and whatnot. For just simplicity reasons, we didn't do it. That's a personal decision, right? How you want to split up the all those things. Make
hmm
sense though? I think that's
Yeah,
the biggest one, and it might
absolutely.
be surprising to you, is just not doing it. And it tends to come from inertia,
hmm
and it's really, really dangerous in the United States. It's a
Yeah.
very litigious country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's even the other side to this that I would even encourage people to think about is not only is forming an LLC something that is very cost effective for what it's going to give you in terms of protection, liability protection, it also just legitimizes the fact that you're like, I'm going to go after this and try this thing. And for the low barrier to entry of costs that it does cost you, even just the momentum of being like, I have an entity set up now. I think there's a lot of security in that. I think that creates a lot of momentum for people. So I love that answer. Why don't you break down the different types of entities? Because I think one of the biggest confusion points for people and why they don't elect to have an entity is they're like, I don't understand an LLC. I don't understand an S corp. I don't understand a C corp. corp. Now, obviously, we're speaking to an audience here. We got creatives in Australia, New Zealand, different parts of Africa, all over Europe, obviously Canada and the US. There's people all over the place. And we're obviously going to talk specifically about the US system here. But if you're listening to the show, figure out how this applies to you because this is very important stuff. But Hooman, why don't you break down the entity types that you think solopreneurs should be considering? What are some of the advantages to each type of entity, and how would you best describe them in a simple format?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would say is let's start from the basics, and I won't go too far into it for all you international listeners. We'll get to some other stuff, but think of it as a sole prop. So there's no entity. I think that's the first and most obvious choice, and that's most. I think most businesses tend to do that. The second is a limited liability corporation (LLC). That gives you legal protection and separates your personal liability from your business liability. The other thing that I think that opens up, which I didn't mention before, is you have access to different financial instruments that are only available once you have the entity and the EIN. For example, business banking, business credit
Hmm.
card. I also recommend strongly, and I know I'm kind of jumping between entity structure and also maybe best practice financially, but I have a business credit card and I have a business bank account, and I only use those two things. I
Hmm.
highly recommend you don't commingle funds.
Yep.
One, it's not a great best practice for your accountant, but two, it can make it so much easier for you to manage your business. Like I remember my mom, the very first thing she told me when she was a psychiatrist and trainer practice, she said, get your own card, always put everything on that card. That's it. And
Hmm.
to this day, I think that's probably one of the best pieces of simple advice that I've ever had. Do not use your personal card, because what you do is you end up giving to your accountant like this mess. And they're like, I don't know which was the Uber ride for work. Was it not for work? If everything's on one card, they just know that's all for work. And now
Hmm.
they can contest that and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you're expensing too much and what have you, but there's no question that you thought it was for work.
Hmm.
Right. And then the PLLC is a professional LLC. Some states require it. So you have to look at the regulatory frameworks on a state by state basis. For example, if you're a healthcare professional in certain states, you have to have it. There's a professional corporation that's like California has that as well. I think those types of entities tend to you need those actually. It's almost like you don't get to choose it if you want to practice medicine, psychiatry, things like that.
Hmm.
Different states have, there's a
Professional
certain,
services.
exactly, there's a standard that you have to bear. And so it's almost less of a choice and obligation. In some ways, that
Yep.
makes it easier for you as a founder. So, like, if
Yeah.
you're a creative and you're a photographer, those probably aren't going to be the things that you have to do on average. You tend to see that in those types of professions. Um, the C Corp, that, you basically have double taxation versus an LLC. So you get taxed as an employee, but you also get taxed, um, you know, uh, at the company level. Now you might say, why
Hmm.
would you do that? Oftentimes with people that there's other properties of C Corp. Most common, you want to create an entity where you want to distribute shares to your
Hmm.
employees. So that's one of the features. So Collective is a C Corp.
Yeah, of
If you want to
course.
raise venture capital, anyone out there, and the creators tend to start companies, by the way. They don't always just create companies that are bootstrapped or whatever, but they might create a venture backed company. You should
Yeah.
be a C Corp, and often a Delaware based C Corp. Why? It turns out all the big four lawyers know that there's the most precedent. It's the cheapest to set up, and then you can
Hmm.
issue shares and whatnot. There's a movement now with some of, I would say the more aggressive folks to go to Texas, for example, and other places. But I'd say if I had to bet, 90 some percent of folks are based in Delaware, and it's easier
Yeah.
because all
We're
the
based in
registered,
Delaware as well, technically. Yeah. My wife and
exactly,
I. Yeah.
exactly, the registered agents are there. It's just easier. There's an easier process there for administration. So, um, and then the last bit I would tell you. Oh, so I skipped MLLC. So MLLC, if you want to go and do that, that's you want to have multiple people who are kind of the big owners inside of the entity. Um, there's governance issues with that. So typically, again, I'm giving you really simple, high level. You might see that. Say you're starting a business with your wife or your loved one or a couple
Hmm.
partners. People tend to look at that as a potential alternative. It is more complex from a tax and accounting perspective. And so there's elegance to having an LLC. There's ways, by the way, to give ownership in an LLC as well. So you can just have units that you basically can give, or rights, sorry, I believe they're called. So sometimes people will think they have to do MLC just to give away
Hmm.
or to give ownership. You don't have to do that. You can give ownership through an LLC as well. It's
Yep.
just there's different privileges from a governance perspective. Um, what else did I have here? Sorry, you're giving me a. I
Well,
feel
the
like I'm on the
golden
question.
one,
S corp.
the S corp, the golden one, right? And
Yes.
this is what Collective is entirely built around. So, just for everybody listening, Christy and I, everyone listening to the show would know, Christy and I, we originally built an LLC down here. It's a Delaware-based LLC. And then we have elected as an S corp, and so I'm sure we're gonna get into that a bunch. But speaking of the C Corp, so I was a C Corp in Canada, and I was actually a big fan of the Canadian tax system from a corporate level, not so much a personal level, but from a corporate level. I'm actually a fan of it, and I'm really a fan of how I used a C Corp and it's where some of the savings were in that. And when I came to the US, part of the confusion for me is that a C Corp in Canada is much different than a C Corp here in the US. They operate and look similar, but a lot of people would say, unless you're ever looking to sell, exit, or distribute shares to different people, you shouldn't get a C corp in the US, especially if you're a solo creator,
I agree.
solopreneur. So
Yeah.
what I didn't understand when I first came here was the magic of a word called the S corp. So why don't you break down what an S corp is? Christy and I are now an S corp, but for everybody listening, break down what an S corp is and why it's advantageous to solopreneurs or solo creators.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say is there is no such thing as an S corp, which may be controversial. It's not an entity type in the US, and that's a mistake people often make. I made that mistake even when starting a company. An S election is a tax election that you can take on an entity. So, for
Mm,
example, my company that I have through Collective is an LLC, but it takes an S election. And what that
hmm.
does is it creates the tool effectively for me at my company to do not only to pay myself as a W-2 employee, but also to do what's called a distribution. And that's where the magic comes in tax savings. And I'm happy to walk through an example of how uh, the easy way you can save. Now, we talk about tax savings for S selected companies or S corps. Again, that's like a slang term, but it's
Hmm.
not a different formation type. You are an LLC, right?
It's an
Legally. And
election.
exactly. It's really important for people to understand that. But it's that distribution. So when we say we can save $10,000 on average, that's actually the savings only from S selected companies. Of course, there's other ways you can save through,
Hmm.
expense deductions and so on and so forth. It's funny. We originally had, I can't remember what it was, but like $16,000, $17,000 of savings. And we just thought this is ridiculous. Like people are going to think we're like just completely full of it when we say it. But I mean, it turns out if you just do your finances properly, you
Hmm.
can save quite a bit of
Absolutely.
money. There's not that much magic to it. The S selection itself, I would say, is a fairly magical. For me, it was magical. Where if you pay yourself a proper distribution, which I use all the time, to pay myself, Hooman, not my entity will pay me as the owner a
Hmm.
distribution, and that's how you save money. So again, happy to walk you through an example, but that's what an
Yeah,
S
yeah.
corp
Well, let's
does.
get into that. So the benefit of an S corp, you're saying, and this is again a great example of what myself, Christy, my wife, and I have done. We're an LLC that elects as an S corp, and the benefit of an S corp is that we have to set up payroll, so we're able to pay ourselves a salary, and then we're able to take distributions as the owner of the company. And for
Correct.
everyone listening, going, but why is that beneficial? The reason why it's beneficial is because distributions are taxed at a lower level than income tax is from actually receiving a salary. So the advantage here, and I'm assuming this is how you're saving most people money, your average member saving up to $10,000 in tax savings a year from S elections, is because you are getting them to adjust their actual salary they're getting paid to be appropriate to what somebody would be making. But I'm assuming you're trying to keep that as low as possible. So they pay the smallest amount of actual income tax, and yet they take the highest amount of distributions they can, which is taxed at a lower rate. Fill in the gaps if I missed anything.
No, you said it great. Let's use an example just for the. I mean, uh, I myself also am a creative by background here, so I like to think through examples and actually see it
Hmm.
versus the theoretical. So
Let's do it.
let's say Joey Co makes $200,000 in revenue, and but let's say his income less expenses is $100,000. Okay, so
Yep.
now
$100,000 of expenses, $100,000 of profit.
let's just say so exactly. And so now, how does Joey pay himself? Right, such that he makes the most amount of money possible post tax. So the first thing we would tell Joey is, hey, Joey Co., you should be Joey Co. You're a sole prop, as an example. Make sure you have an LLC or some sort of legal protection. Okay.
Hmm.
By the way, you can also do all those things that I told you by getting a business bank account and other financial tools that are only available to businesses. You can start lumping your expenses and deducting them that way, shape, or form. Okay. The second thing is say, well, Joey Co., can you take an S election, which I know that you guys have already done in this example. And then you might say, well, what is that? I said, well, now, Joey, you have two roles. You are an employee of Joey Co., and you're the owner of Joey Co. And those
Hmm.
people can get paid differently, and that's where the magic comes in. As an employee, you're still paying normal taxes, okay? But as a owner, you can pay yourself what's called a distribution, and that, to your point, is taxed the lower rate. You don't pay Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. So I think some people call them FICA, FISA, but those are the taxes that, and that's about
Hmm.
15% less tax. Okay.
Hmm.
And so if we take that $100,000, we could say, well, okay, let's do a simple example. Joey might pay himself $50,000 and that from a W-2, and that's taxed
Salary.
according
Yeah.
salary, correct? And then you might pay yourself 50,000 in that distribution, right? And then you're saving 15%, right? So that's $7,500. That's it. You save that no matter what. And that's kind of the magic. Now you might say, thanks, Hooman. Well, I figured out that tool. Thanks for the tutorial. I'm just going to pay myself 100,000 through the distribution. I'd say, well, you can, right? But what if you're in the state of California and other states, you're supposed to pay yourself what's called a reasonable income. And then you
Hmm.
say, well, what is that? And that's where the trick is, because if you pay
That's where it
yourself
gets gray.
zero,
Yeah.
it's very gray.
Red flag.
And if you pay yourself zero, you'll probably get hit by the IRS. Maybe not in the
Yep.
current administration, given some of the reductions in force there, but you will. So that's a trigger. And so the question is, what do I pay myself between 0 and 100, such that I can maximize my distribution? And so that's
Hmm.
where you would come to an accountant, you would go to whatever, and try to figure that out together. Um, but obviously, your incentive structure is to try to maximize your distribution to the degree
Hmm.
possible. If you're trying to maximize your short-term savings, right?
Yep.
The reality is most people who are high income aren't really going to rely on their Social Security, and so overpaying into that isn't really tax efficient. You'd almost rather have that income and put into call it a
100%.
401k, which also,
100%.
by the way,
Yeah.
has tax advantages if you have a solo 401k. There's pre-tax
Yep.
investments. So, look, everyone from Ashton Kutcher to Joe Biden is using this tool because it's you're saving.
Hmm.
And so that's where it starts getting complicated, because now you're like, oh, okay, well, now I have to keep my books, right? I have to have a payroll system, even if I'm one person. In your case, you have two.
Yep.
And then I have to do these taxes, and often you have to do quarterly tax systems annual. So it's not free, listeners. Like, this is not,
Yeah.
meaning, like,
100%.
you would have an easier time as a sole prop LLC from an administration perspective. Our
Yep.
hope, our goal, is to try to make it as easy as possible. Hopefully, at some point, set and forget it for S corp administration. Like, I've talked to people, and they're like, "Wow, this is way more work than I thought." I said, "Wow, try it out without us. It
Hmm.
is
Oh,
very
100%. Yeah.
difficult." Um,
Yeah.
about 64% of collective members now come to us. They have an entity. They're called takeovers. So they get it.
Mm.
They get how hard this is, and they'll come to us. It used to be that people were coming and forming and doing the whole thing. And now
Hmm.
we're attracting people who say, no, 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 I've done this. This is really hard stuff.
Yep.
I don't want to be a part of this. And I want one person. It also is strange because there are some accounting firms actually will handle end to end all these things. They're not that many, especially for
Hmm.
solopreneurs, but the
Yep.
amount they charge you, and I've done the diligence. I looked at an accounting firm,
Astronomical.
10 grand,
Hmm.
10 grand. And so again, it's all about getting educated on these things, and
Hmm.
saying, like, for you as a creative, what's better? Do you want to go flat price, one place, software driven, right? Or do you want to go an accountant? Now, good news, an
Hmm.
accountant, there's a lot of bespoke things they could do for your business. They might give you advanced tax planning. You're going to pay for that, right? And so
Hmm.
what we're trying to do is say,
Yep.
like, we're going to be the base, and over time we want to add more and more. But if you just want to go, we're probably the best solution in the market. And, and
Hmm.
frankly, I think we are.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you guys are as well. I think the biggest question people are going to ask when they hear this is they go, Hooman, this all sounds awesome. What does this cost? You're saying it's more complicated. It's going to have additional costs. So I'll quickly cover what this probably costs not using Collective. As I said,
Yeah,
Christy and
please.
I
I'd love to
would
hear that
love
if you
to
don't
use
mind.
Collective. Yeah, absolutely. We would love to use Collective. You guys are working towards being set up for multi-member LLCs and stuff as you guys grow. I'm excited for the day when that becomes a reality. But last year, I actually have a great relationship with my accountant. I'm a big fan, so he's been great. His whole team's awesome. But my wife and I paid to have all of our. This isn't our books too. This is just for our accounting services. Our bookkeeper's a different fee. Just for our books, we paid about $7,800, I think, last year. Sorry, not for our books, just for our accounting.
Hmm.
$7,800 for the advanced tax strategy planning, the S election, and a few other things. There's still a few things where I'm moving. I actually moved my company fully out of Canada at the end of 2023 and down here. So there's a couple
That's
other
expensive.
things, some billable hours, but yeah, but it's expensive. And from my understanding, Collective is you guys are about just under 4 grand a year, all in, correct?
Yeah, it's 349 a month. If you pay annually, you get a 15% discount. And I think, it's funny. I had spoken with my stepmom. My stepmom administered my dad's S elected company in Pittsburgh. And we did the back of the envelope, and it was somewhere around, I think, $8,000 or so for her to do it. Now, she had a bookkeeping, software that they had to rent. She actually did her expense categorization. Then she had someone who would do the reconciliation for her just to tick and tie it. And then she had a tax professional that she would go to who would do the business tax filings. And then I can't remember if the same person did their personal taxes as well. And so all in all it was 8 grand. And that's with her doing work and having to go to different
Mm-hmm.
systems
Yeah.
and all this other stuff. God forbid your business changes or there's something you have a question, because the person you ask the question to charges you per hour. And so
Yeah.
your incentive structure is to not talk to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think what Collective is a great solution for people that are just looking for transparency, one person they can talk to. I think, again, there's some people that want, uh, I think, more advanced tax planning, and they want to do like financial strategy meetings and all that stuff, like a CFP,
Yeah.
certified financial planner. And I think we could even work in concert with them. But right now, it's
Yeah.
just, hey, we're hitting this as well as we can at the park. This case of administering all this stuff end to end, because there doesn't exist a solution there. That's where we're
Mm-hmm.
really the strongest.
Yeah.
You
It's
know, I had a,
brilliant.
I had a,
It's amazing.
I had a guy that was like, he pinged me, and he's just, he's a fairly sophisticated guy, and he had, a lot of income, and he wanted to scale his business and all this other stuff. I said, man, you're in a different position. He might even raise, he was like, I might raise venture. Okay, well, that's a different story. I mean, I
Yeah,
give
of
you a lot of
course.
different advice.
Yeah, of course. Well, love it. So for about $4,000 or less, you guys are handling not only all of the accounting, but you're also handling all of the bookkeeping as well, with kind of concierge style, where you are incentivizing a relationship and incentivizing conversation, which is great. As you said, the traditional accounting uh, industry is kind of de-incentivizing all that stuff, right? It's don't talk to us or else you're going to get billed, which is not helpful. So I love that. Well, quick little plug for Collective. If you guys want to get started with Collective, Christy and I are huge fans. I've vetted what they do. I've got lots of people that have gone through our masterminds that have started using them. Hit the link in the description. You actually get 50% off your first 3 months using code Creative Rise, which is awesome. So I'm a fan of that. Thanks for hooking up everybody listening to the show with that discount as well. I'm excited about that. So take advantage of that, guys. If you're listening, down in the description, you'll find that there. But let's talk a little bit more about the tax strategy behind this, Hooman. So if you could describe, we touched on it just briefly a second ago, but if you could go back to describing like what is the best tax strategy in the simplest format, loaded question, but like the best tax strategy in the simplest format for a self-employed creative who is making, let's say they are making um, 60 to $100,000 of profit. Like, what are the things that they should be doing? We touched on an S corp. Obviously, you want to set up an entity. You're going to want to elect as an S corp, pay yourself a salary, a very low, reasonable salary, and then also start paying yourself distributions. What else should people be looking for that can help minimize their tax liability, aka minimize how much you got to pay in taxes?
Well, I think the other thing that is a piece of the puzzle, and we hope to be able to help with it at some point, we get tons of questions towards the end of a calendar year, is retirement. And so when you
Mm,
own your own business, you're obviously accountable for making sure that when you're done with that said business, that you can live your life post work. And the most tax efficient way to do that is, I think you have to look at your cash flow and say, okay, given what I'm making this year, and again, service business and creatives are very different. I think I'll answer you specific to that. I personally am a big fan of trying to run lean and save heavy, especially when you're younger.
Yeah.
And I would put as much as I could of that savings into something like a solo 401k, SEP RRA. There are advantages to each of these things, but things that are pre-tax investment vehicles, 'cause if you're going to save for retirement anyway, and you do that
Hmm.
before the end of the year, and you start to, again, this just starts to compound because that's pre-tax. It's not like you're putting in, it's your company is helping you out with that. And so I think those are, again, I'm giving you the basics, but if I had planned and I said I'm going to be a creative, I'm going to make a couple hundred grand a year, I would do that S election. I would immediately, I'd run to get something set up on 401k. And I would not mess around with that, or in a SEP RIA. And there's different advantage to each. I think maybe for another time we could walk through that, but it's another thing that I see. Like the biggest things, just people just don't do it. They'll put stuff in their Robinhood, and they don't get any tax advantage on that, right?
Hmm.
Like you're just investing your own money, and it's not, it's fine if you want to trade, but you can do it in these sheltered accounts if you want to
Hmm.
trade within them, like even a Roth. There's
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that.
Big
So,
fans of that. Yeah.
and I think it's strange. Like hopefully your listeners are conversant in all these things and think about it. But the biggest mistakes people make are not the mistakes they don't know about. It's the ones they know about, but they don't take the action. There's no like secrets. I think we live in the world where there's infinite information. You can go to
Hmm.
GPT and ask them a million tools. It's
Yeah.
because people won't do it. And you have to it's about doing it consistently over a large number of years. It's kind of the Warren Buffett style approach. Keep it simple, do something you can go and shove away. Like, you'd have to work backwards on retirement, but put away a lot, like 20% into that
Hmm.
retirement, but use those accounts
Yes,
versus
absolutely.
just throwing it into your Robinhood or your crypto. I mean, again, there's different mechanisms, but that's what the often I see someone's a sole prop and they just randomly invest in these random online because they're all easy, right? And then all of a sudden, three,
Yeah.
four
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
down the road, they do that and they have all their finances commingled on personal and then whatever, and then they want to get professional. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. And it's just a pain. It's a pain to untangle
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah. Talk about, I'm familiar with like maxing out your Roths and all that stuff. Talk about how much money can be saved. Do you think if you were to add a lot of those things together, and there's tons of different account types and structures where you can, save with some pre-tax stuff, but like what are you think if someone was to take advantage of all the pre-tax funding of accounts, of retirement accounts, how much money do you think somebody could be saving per year on their taxes just from that? Rough ballpark, because I know it's
Oh, I don't
complicated,
know.
but
I don't know. Let me see. I'm going to do this in the back of my head, but it depends on how much you're saving. If you're aggressive and you're saving, I don't know, 10, 20 grand a year, I mean, if you do pre-tax and you're not investing in, I mean, a couple grand, 5 grand, but it compounds every
yeah,
year. So
absolutely.
I'd say, yeah, order of magnitude. You could do like
Hmm.
5 grand, and then you compound that with a S corp election. You compound that with the fact that you're starting to do your expense categorization properly, and you're actually deducting these things instead of just like, I mean, people don't expense anything again. So I'm telling you, the biggest mistakes are these really, really absurd ones. Like you're buttoned up, and you're an outlier. That's not normal. People don't just
Mm.
use like their credit card, like a business credit card and a business account. It's like very atypical, I would say, of a solopreneur. In particular, in our creatives in our community, I found that that's the case. It's just photographers or designers or what have you. Um, it's because you just get into it. You know what I mean? It's organic. You
Hmm.
just start working and you're figuring something.
Yeah,
Again, it tends to be in
it's
three
not a
years you pick up
primary
your head.
focus.
Exactly. And so I think, there's some really easy ways to do that. But, think about it over a 20-year window if you're going to be a professional. And every
Hmm.
year you could have saved 20 to 30 grand,
Hmm.
right?
It absolutely adds up.
It's not
Absolutely.
20 to 30 grand times 20 years, by the way. You have to account for all of the value accretion that's inside of those accounts. And so you're talking
Hmm.
about, I don't know, if you 700 grand, 600 grand that you just like put
Hmm.
by the wayside because you let inertia take hold.
Hmm.
And that's just a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is a couple days a year with the right team, with the right information can get you set up, and you can have all these systems operating like, whether you pick something like Collective, whether you pick something that's more of like a local accountant or a tax strategist, whatever that might be. I think a lot of people think it takes so much education and time to get these systems in place, and it really doesn't. It just takes picking the right person, maybe a little bit of money up front, and you are on your way, which is a beautiful thing. And as Hooman just talked about, there is massive incentives down the line as you really think about how this compounds every year. Here's a question I probably should have asked earlier on in the episode: when should someone go from an LLC or a sole prop to actually start electing as an S corp? Like, at what income threshold or profit threshold, we should probably say, should a creative go, I now need to become an S corp because the benefits of an S corp are now there for me, and I need to start taking it in order to save massive amounts of money on my taxes every year?
Well, I think if you want to, like, qualitatively, what you want to say is, um, you want the administrative cost to be less than the savings, right?
Hmm.
And so, as an example, if I told you I'm going to save you $10,000 a year and a collective costs $4,000 a year, by the way, you still have to do quite a bit of that work, regardless of whether you're S selected or not. It's,
Hmm.
there's more you have to do as an S selected company, but you still were going to file your taxes. You're still going to organize your finances. You're still going to set up a bank account, all these things, right? That seems to me like a no-brainer. And so what I would say is we've typically seen it somewhere between 60K to 80K prof threshold. We do the math. What we do though is we have a calculator on our website. You can use that. It's free. You can even talk to one of our folks like you did, and they'll run through it with you, and it's free. And say, hey,
Hmm.
does this back of the envelope make sense given what you're doing? And my advice to you is just always, always, always just make sure that the rubber hits the road, right? If it gets to a point where you're kind of like, hey, it's going to cost me, I'm making it up, 4 grand and I'm saving 4 grand. Okay, maybe that administrative burden isn't worth it for you. Now, if your revenue is ripping and you're growing real fast, we've had people like that. We had a lady went in 6 months from 0 to 700, and the next year she went to 1.5 million.
Hmm.
She's just a excellent podcast kind of person, and she just did some great work. Well, yeah, that makes sense. She can
Hmm.
look at her forward growth. But if you're like kind of like, hey, I'm just slow and steady, and you're at that indifference point, I'd say don't do it. Just wait, because it's a
Hmm.
lot. There is administration. Even with collective, it's much easier. But like maybe you're not sure that that's the right structure for you yet.
Hmm.
Like a side
Yeah.
hustler, like maybe like a X driver or something like that. Like
Yeah.
I don't think it's worth it. We hope to have plans for that. So for example, what I'd say is, hey, you might want to always get an LC or some entity so you get sued, right? Especially think about an Uber
Hmm.
driver. My God, you get in a car crash, they're suing
Yeah. Oh my
you,
goodness.
not
Yeah.
your company. And that's a really dangerous position to be in, by the way.
Yep.
Very normal position for them to be in. But they don't need that. They might just need some simple like bookkeeping, and they don't need a business tax return. They just need an individual tax return. We're gonna
Hmm.
have an offer like that, and that should be much cheaper. And then now you're doing the math. You're like, oh, okay, well, do I want to pay? I don't know, making it up, 2 grand a year, or like, well, okay, now that makes sense. Well, I have to do it anyway, and so that now you're competing on a different level. So
Hmm.
that's what I'd say
Yeah,
to folks.
absolutely. That's great. And I think to add on to that, I love what you said. If your revenue is ripping, if you have any plans on growing, you should probably be set up to scale from an accounting and bookkeeping perspective prior to you getting there. I'm sure you guys deal a lot with people who are like, we grew so much last year and everything's a mess. And it will actually cost you probably more to sort out the mess the year after you grew than it might have cost you in that initial year to set it up to then have the systems in place as you grew. That is, I'm sure, something you guys deal with all the time. And that'd be a
Well,
huge recommendation from us
yeah.
is get the stuff set up prior to you really starting to quote unquote see the benefit from as Hooman had said, your revenue savings, your tax savings are starting to outweigh what it's costing you to have these systems. I think even if you're even remotely close to breaking even, you should still do it because it's the peace of mind. Like you guys, like you had said, the peace of mind having collective or having a great accounting partner in your back pocket is so comforting, knowing that you're doing the things right and you're set up to scale.
I think I agree. And again, we're going to try to continue to extend the support more cases. So I would say, for example, hey, you should do an LLC, and we'll help you with that. And you should, do some basic accounting and keep your funds not commingled, right? I mean, those are some basics that I think people should do. And then if you want, you could say, okay, well, I want to, hopefully if you're with collective and you did that plan, then we could say, okay, we can easily select you, and you just turn on a switch and all your payroll turns on, all these other things, right? So we can grow with you. Our challenge internally is to do that and make it easy for those people who are either starting out or they're stuck, or there's cities like New York or DC where it's not always clear because they have other taxes. Like in New York, there's a tax called GCT. And so if you're S elected, then you have to do some complicated kind of calculations to see if you should do an S corp. And you know, I'll give you an example. Like we opened New York to test, and we took on people and we try to educate them on it. And it was tough. It was tough in the early days. And so we decided, hey, you know what? Let's take a step back. Let's have this like LLC only product, which is the majority of people could benefit from for SNES selection. Even if you educate people, they come in, they're like, well, I didn't know what GCT was. Well, we can't do every part of your tax stack yet. And so it's learning for us. It's learning for folks. Um, Even accountants. I mean, I'm sure you work with them. There's a lot of specialization. Some of them will be like, I'm not
Hmm.
going to handle this. I'm not going to handle that. You
Yep.
know, my cousin has two different accountants for a very specific reason because she's in e-commerce and some people don't like doing sales tax or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. So let's start to round some of this conversation out just to be
sure.
really clear so people that are listening are like, I know exactly what my path to financial stability and financial reducing financial liability, is number one, get an entity. Number two, separate your business banking and your business spending. So that's getting business bank accounts, getting business credit cards or debit cards. Then you keep track of all your expenses to make sure that you are able to then take those deductions once tax season comes. And then once you hit a minimum of probably $60,000 in profit, if you're in the US, you should be electing an S election to get taxed as an S corp so that you can start to save money by paying yourself payroll and then taking the rest as distributions that are
Correct.
taxed at a much lower rate. Um, did I miss anything?
I'd
Anything
say
to add to that?
the only bit I would, because we talked about it in passing, would be even when you're starting out, always be saving, always be saving. And I guess just
Hmm.
as an entrepreneur, I've founded multiple companies. I've invested in over 50. I've seen companies from Uber to Sweetgreen, you know, go public. I think wealth is uh, spending less than you make,
Yeah,
not being
100%.
rich. And there's a confusion among people on that. If I never spend all the money I make, I'm wealthy, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so
It's
just make sure
margins.
you're saving. Exactly. Make sure you're saving. And so that even starts, if you say, for example, I don't want an LC yet, I'm not ready. That's okay. Then, and let's say you don't have business credit card, you can still separate them. You can have one card, for example. I would just
Hmm.
advise, say you can even do training wheels, like have one card then that you use, even if it's personal. So then when you do switch over, at least that accountant, whether it be us or someone else, says, okay, these are all what you thought was business. It's less about the fact that it is a business credit card in label, so much as that accountant sees that there's not commingling of funds. So start with that. And also, okay, you can do a Roth IRA ASAP. And if you're small, you know, you're probably not going to max out the contribution. It's a couple $1,000s, right? Like it's easy.
Hmm.
So just start those best practices and you can keep leveling up, leveling up, leveling up. But it's pretty simple to do that. And error on the side of, you know, don't overthink all these tools, in my opinion, too much. It's more about just get something in place so you understand the best practice. Um, because in this world that we live in, luckily there's more and more tools, there's more and more things happening. I find so much that when you're a business, when I am, you're by yourself, you're like, wow, I don't even know. Should I do this? Should I do this? The reality is if you're a photographer or you're anyone for like, what do you know about bookkeeping? What do you know about any of these things? Give yourself some sort of grace and say, you know what? I'm going to
Hmm.
do my best. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to get someone because
Hmm.
somebody should know more than me. And guess what? It may not work out, but at least you're going to get educated. And then the next time you want to get someone, you can go. But doing nothing is not a good option. And I
Hmm.
think that's the inertia. Back to my point, fight that. Because if you do that on your revenue side and you're doing it on your cost side, your business isn't going to work out.
Hmm. Yeah. You'll never be able to like outmake brutal financial habits, right? Brutal
Exactly.
financial habits scale as your revenue grows. So does bad financial habits. So I love what you said there. We'll wrap up with that. Just like getting simple things done so that you are in place and you are structured. You've got some structure to your finances, whether it's on the bookkeeping side, it's on the accounting side, on the tax strategy side, but most importantly, as you're saying, just also on the saving side, right? Putting stuff away. We're really, really big fans of that. Well, Hooman, thank you for your just advice, your time today. This has been really great. And just a reminder for everybody, if you're interested in Collective, Christy and I would highly suggest you check them out if you're in the US. I wish that you guys were in all the other countries we mentioned, and I'm sure maybe one day down the road you guys are going to start to expand. But for now, if you're in the US, it's a great option that is not only really cost effective, but also just a really, really impressive suite of services you guys have put together. So from us, just thank you for doing what you're doing for the solopreneur community, because you guys are doing some great stuff.
Thank you. And I will leave it with, I know you guys have an offer, and we're really happy to be partnering with you guys on that side. But I would say, get educated, folks. And we offer a lot of education. We have webinars, we have blog content, we have stuff on our Instagram. So it's collective.com, but get educated across the board. Find what works best for you, right? We've done things with, like, there's classes like Indie Collective where they teach you how to be a solopreneur. And Sam and his team do a great job. We come in and teach classes there. So yes, I would love everyone in the world to use Collective if we can earn your business and if it's the best solution. But it doesn't matter. These are just general tools. Collective is an implementation and tactical version of that. And I think it works really well. Like for me, I'm a member. It's great. I couldn't do it. And me and my wife are glad to have, I pay for it. My brother does it as well. But I think just get educated and make decisions and pick things. You can always move around, but indecision is a decision, I guess. And if I leave you one thing
Mm.
there, don't sit on your hands, because by doing that, you are making a decision. You're making a decision to be a mess.
Mm, there it is, guys. We'll wrap with that. Well, Hooman, that's so great. Appreciate the time today, man. Thank you. Well, that was a great episode with Hooman, breaking down so many complex things. Hopefully that was a very inspiring episode for you, because you felt like you were able to get more of a grasp on your own financial ecosystem. Maybe you need to make an entity type shift. Maybe you need to jump in and start electing as an S Corp and start saving some great money. Now, if you are in another country and you're not in the US, make sure you take some time and think about how today's conversation applies to you. Every tax code is different in each and every single country, but there's a lot of things that are congruent to what we talked about today that can be applied, whether you're in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, all over the UK, different parts of the world. You are going to be able to leverage the things we've talked about today in order to save money on your own taxes, which is a massive thing that you should be thinking about, because every dollar you work hard to earn, you should be considering how you can save more of that dollar and how more of it can end up in your pocket, which is very important. So another big shout out to Hooman for coming on the show today. That was awesome. Guys, quick reminder, if you want to consider even walking down the path with, if you're in the US, and what it would look like to work with Collective, Christy and I vetted them. We have already done the due diligence to vet this to make sure that it is a good solution. We've very ever rarely endorsed anything on this podcast in 223 episodes. This is one of the first, or one of the few things that we have endorsed as something that we have vetted that we truly believe is a really good solution for you. So if you're in the US, all you do is go to the link in the description. You'll be able to use click on that link and then use the code Creative Rise. That's going to give you up to $500 a year in savings, which is awesome. Big fans of them for hooking us up and hooking you guys up with that discount code. So make sure you use code Creative Rise in order to get that discount. And then even better, if you just want to jump on Collective and play around with their calculators and figure out what it could look like for you to save more money on your taxes, that link is also in the description of the show, guys. But super excited about this episode. Hopefully this was very helpful for you. If it was, make sure you share it with a friend. If you have another friend who is also self-employed, who has to save more money on their taxes, same way you're going to be doing that this next year, make sure you send this to them, share it with a friend. And from Christy and I and the rest of the team here, super excited to come back at you guys next week with another great episode. So get excited for that, and we will catch you guys soon.